I had to go through, just like everybody else, a complete breakdown of all the programming and brainwashing about salt. Okay. So the original program is like salt bad, don't have salt, salt, high blood pressure. And oh my God, salt terrible and cardiovascular problems and all of the stuff that we got programmed with. Now, none of the salt that we ate when we were kids, typically, unless you grew up in a healthy family, was anything that comes from nature. It wasn't sea salt. It wasn't a rock salt that came out of Salzburg, Austria. It wasn't a rock salt that came out of a spring in Marai in Peru, or, it wasn't natural. It was cooked off. And so basically a lot of these chemicals like fluoride, where does it come from? It's cooked off of salt. There's like 30% of the salt is basically cooked off and sold to chemical companies. And then they congeal the last bit left, the sodium chloride, down to about 99% purity, and then sell that as a food preservative or a table salt. So you'll see that a lot in foods. You'll see like sodium chloride or calcium chloride or something like that as a preservative. And then of course the table salt that went on French fries, that was just sodium chloride. And the bond is tighter. So when I learned chemistry, we called those ionic bonds. So when it's been cooked down, so they took off all the trace minerals, those have all been cooked away. They're all gone, sold to chemical companies. That's where they all went. And then all you have is sodium chloride that's been cooked down. That's an ionic bond, and that's hard to break. It's hard for your system to break it. So that's the wrong kind of salt, and it causes all those problems, high blood pressure and all of the different cardiovascular problems and dehydration and just all the things. But eventually one day you become conscious and you go, my God, I'm supposed to be having sea salt. I'm supposed to having like a real rock salt, a salt that comes from the earth. It's natural, has all the minerals in it, 80 trace minerals, for example. And we had to get fancy about that, because if you told people, let's eat more salt, they go, no, it's salt, bad, we can't have that. So then we had to get fancy. We had to come up with words like electrolytes, just so people wouldn't have this resistance to what it actually is. So these electrolyte products are just fancy salts. I call them designer salt products. That's what it is. So, whoa, like what a discovery of like, you mean all these electrolyte products are just designer salts? Yes, that's what I mean. That means we should just get back to the original salt. And the answer is yes, we should. Which ones? Well, personally, I'm a sea salt guy, because I've seen crazy things over the years with sea salts. You have sea salt in a container, and eventually it gets up into the grooves of the container, and you screw the container off, and you're like, you can feel the salt got into the grooves. It's coming out. It's escaping. Amazing stuff like that. Or you'd see salts crystallize in a little container, and it's like, whoa, this stuff's growing in there. And it's alive. This is a very deep wound that's affected humanity. The scientism of like, that's dead and this is living, and it's just nonsensical. It's like everything's living. It's been standing room only all along, or like, are we alone in the universe? It's just nonsense. It's like, who came up with that? What a terrible program that was. And it has nothing to do with reality. If you just observe, for example, go to the beach yourself and find the spots where the sea salt accumulates. So a place where high tide can get to, but none of the other tides. And then the salt water will eventually evaporate out, and you'll have some salts there. And that's how salt actually forms from the sea. And you'll see like, whoa, if you catch that and put it in a container and leave it around, you'll see, my God, it's a living thing in there. What a surprise. So that's why we go to sea salt or electrolytes. Now, how fundamental is this to life? It's the most fundamental. Basically, we're water, sea salt, and light and energy, right? Before anything else. And I've had to learn that through numerous interesting lessons in my life. And eventually I realized that salt held the cure for what my problems were, which was allergies, asthma, and autoimmune problems. And when you get into an autoimmune loop and you can't shut it off, I found out finally how to shut it off, which is drink salt water, sea salt and water in big amounts, like 1 tablespoon per liter, or 1.5 tablespoons, or 1.25 tablespoons per liter. And if that level of drinking salt water, I started going, it would stop it right away. I get the itchy eyes, stop within 10 minutes. The throat, the scratchy throat, all of a sudden I'm scratching and this kind of thing, stop, 10 minutes, gone. I was like, salt water did that. This brought me to an amazing statement that I'm going to tell you, that the most intractable conditions typically have the simplest cure. That's an amazing discovery. The most difficult conditions, the thing, there's no way that I ever could recover from this. It's usually the simplest things in the world, water and salt. for example, sea salt, of course, and then see what happens. Now, does that mean Himalayan salt's bad? No, that mine in Pakistan is still going to be producing enough of that salt for another 300 years at the current pace that it's going. And it's a great rock salt. Does that mean like I shouldn't get salt from a hot springs like in Marai and in Peru? No, you get that. I love that salt. It's a great salt. What about Icelandic sea salt? Love Icelandic sea salt. I love Mackay sea salt. I love what they're doing there on the big island of Hawaii. They're going 2,000 feet down because all those microplastics on the surface, they're only on the surface. So they're going 2,000 feet down. They pull the water from there and then they dry that and then they get the sea salt from that. Cool idea. And it goes on like that. Of course, I'm a huge fan of Maynard Murray and sea energy agriculture, and I always wanted to carry his salt. So we had problems with the Norder sea salt and trying to get the Icelandic sea salt back in. I was like, let's go to Maynard Murray's pick of the best sea salt in the world, which is the Baja Gold, which is a sea salt that comes from the Sea of Cortez in Baja, Mexico. And that was just really a big change for me because that salt seems to have a really low amount of sodium chloride in it and a lot of the other ones. Now, what are the other ones? Like magnesium chloride is super important for digestion. So is potassium chloride. And we could go on like that. There's so many different reactions that depend on salts. There is no better bioavailable form of electrolytes